day that was the fondest memory of your childhood? Would you mind telling that story one more time?
Live it up. Live it up.
Just to me.
Okay. Right now?
Mhm.
Okay. You aren't taking a photo of me or anything?
I'm not taking a photo.
Okay. So this is the story. The time is depression, and things are tough. But my family, if there was a particular great movie, one that my mother wanted to see, my father would bring us to the movies on Sunday afternoon. Before we went into the movies, he would buy a Coke, which we would split 4 ways. When we were in the movies, he would buy a candy bar, and we would split that 4 ways. And after we had seen the movie, on the way home, he would buy a hot dog, and we would split that 4 ways. And boy, that was a great Sunday, a movie and all those treats. We lived in White Plains, which was 23 miles north of Grand Central Station, and all of our relatives in Brooklyn thought that we lived out in the tundra. Everyone would come to visit us for a weekend during the summer. And my father had one great plan for when people visited. They would get up there on Friday night, and on Saturday morning before breakfast, or right after breakfast, he'd say, "Oh, I know what we ought to do. Let's go up to Washington's headquarters." Washington's headquarters was about 4 or 5 miles north of White Plains. It was where Washington had his headquarters during the Battle of White Plains, which was the turning point of the American Revolution, as you rightly know. And we would go up the Parkway all the way to Washington's headquarters, trot through these 4 rooms, and then go all the way home. My relatives were somewhat bored after we had done this on every time they had come to White Plains. This particular weekend, my Uncle Frank and Aunt Emma came up on Friday night, and as usual, my father suggested that we go to Washington's headquarters, and they trudged with us that day. The next morning, after Mass, when we got home, Dad said, "Oh, why don't we go to Washington's headquarters?" And Uncle Frank said, "No, actually, they wanted to see what White Plains was all about. They thought they'd take a trip down to White Plains." And my father said, "Well, you'll need somebody to guide you around. I'll send Arthur with you." I was probably 9 at the time, something like that. And I went along, and I tried to point out points of interest, but they didn't seem particularly interested in them. And then when we got to down on the main street, they saw what they wanted. They saw a beer garden. And we went over to the beer garden, and we sat down at a table, and they each had a glass of beer, and they said, "Would you like a Coke?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Would you like a bag of peanuts?" And I said, "Yes." And so I did get a whole Coke all to myself, and a bag of peanuts all to myself. And then they had another beer, and I had another Coke, and another bag of peanuts. And then they had another beer, and I had another Coke, and I had another bag of peanuts. And by the time we left the beer hall, they had had 6 beers. I had had 6, count them, 6 Coca-Colas, all to myself, and 6 bags of peanuts. And that was the greatest day of my youth.
Very good.